the government. That was number one. I think, what has driven this is, one thing is that everybody needs to be concerned about sustainability and the climate. If you are a bank, your direct footprint is very small. It's essentially an office, but you have, a very big indirect footprint through your portfolio. So that's where the banks can do their work. And the second factor is, of course, the regulators are incredibly important, and they use the banks as an instrument. Not that much yet, but we see it. And of course, banks anticipate that this will be much stronger going forward, like the EU taxonomy, for example, is a very strong example. And then the third factor, I think, is simply that, sustainability risk and climate risk is also financial risk. I think increasingly we speak less about sustainability risk as a separate thing. It's just one aspect of the financial risk, and we will think about it in quite a similar way. If you look at some numbers, it looks like, say, green financing globally this year will almost double versus last year in volume. If you look at green bonds in the Nordic region, it's about 20% of the outstanding volume corporate bonds. It's become quite significant already.
Thank you. Lisa, in IDH's work, has financing been a lever? Have you been able to bring in the banks or put the access to capital question on the table with these different groups?
We always, I think it's a great leverage. So we need it. I think what we focus on as IDH is that we saw that a large asset group like smallholder farmers, they don't get access to finance, especially not in developing countries. So and it's interesting that the products of those farmers can reach our market, but we cannot, but the finance cannot reach them, right? So it does, there's connections that way, but not the other way around. So we created our own fund to try to make that happen. And I think it's especially a lot of financial institutions are risk averse, and we need to what we normally do is that we take the first loss guarantee, so that more banks get into sectors that they don't feel comfortable with in the first place. And I think that's really necessary because we need to invest more also in the smaller farmers and more at farm level in general. We need to put money where our mouth is, literally.
So Sophie, talking about the collaboration model, you talked about the sort of reinforcing bravery that, CEOs being part of the same gang, egg each other on and give each other confidence. But I'd also like to hear about how the collaboration model solves problems. Can you give us some practical examples of how problems that would have taken a longer time to be solved company by company get solved more quickly with you bring a gang to bear?
Yeah, thank you. Very good question. I think I've kind of already touched on one of those already, that kind of element of bravery or motivation. And I think when you bring the group together, they inspire each other to go a bit beyond what they may do alone. So, the first kind of benefit I would say is, being able to set ambitious goals like we did with the ASC commitment, making the companies feel able to go perhaps above and beyond what they might do alone. So I'd say that's one benefit. But the second, I would say, is, being smarter. You bring in companies together, members of the supply chain, different partners, you're automatically bringing different people around the table who come from different regions, different skills, different perspectives, all bringing new ideas and fresh thinking. And so bringing all those people together, you're much more likely to find solutions, implement solutions much more faster on a much bigger scale, which is obviously very important. And then finally, bringing companies together in the supply chain, the opportunity to reduce the amount of resources you're using, and not just money, but also, brain space and human resources. And one example within GSI is that, rather than one company, one region at a time trying a new innovation, we kind of just try it at multiple different places at the same time. So the companies can say, well, that worked here, it didn't work here, or it didn't work until I changed this. And automatically you've saved the companies not just time and money, but all that human resource and actually trying those things. And then we can find out what works, how it works, and put it into practice much more quickly. So together, through the motivation, the efficiencies, and the being smarter, you've got change at speed and scale, which is really what we're trying to do here.
So we've spent quite a bit of time talking about success factors, collaboration, taking a systems approach within the value chain, taking a systems approach between the different power centers in society, setting ambitious goals, lining up the finance with what you want to do. Let's spend a few minutes now talking about the obstacles. Well, what have we found very difficult? And of course, feel free to reflect upon how those obstacles can be overcome. Bruce, do you want to start? Have you had any obstacles? And are you qualified for this question?
Yeah, I think there's always obstacles, but just to pick up on what Sophie was just speaking about is something that I think is becoming increasingly a problem, but is only for me becoming more clear how big of a problem it is the competing bandwidth for organizations. So whether you're a CEO, whether you're a minister of agriculture or fisheries or environment, there are only so many hours in a day that you can spend time working on something. And so I think for organizations to actually figure out which initiatives are going to move them forward or not, then and I think it's also important for these collaboratives and these approaches to really understand the landscape within which they're working, because there are always a million things going on, and somehow whether it's the Global Salmon Initiative or other initiatives, our Farmers for Climate Solutions group, you want to sort of make that the go-to collaboration, so that whether it's finance, governments, others want to participate. Otherwise, the efforts just become too diffuse. And I think there isn't sort of enough thought put into the whole idea of human bandwidth constraining our ability to move at speed and scale.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, to find out where the sweet spot is, where we would get the most return on people's attention, both for them and for all of us.
Yeah, thanks. If I can just add to that exactly, Avram, I think it's this idea of, first of all, being very legitimate in the objectives that you're trying to achieve, and then really trying to understand how do those objectives create value in those different groupings. So where does the public see value? Where do corporations see value? Where does government see value? And I find often the role that we play in these collaborations is helping extract the value proposition out of the different groups.
Many of us have experienced the tendency to go to where the fruits are easy. And you get everybody sort of convening around something which is very doable, even though it's not the thing that really needs doing. Finding the place where it's going to make a difference. Lisa, what obstacles has IDH encountered, or have you guys had a perfect track record so far?
Definitely not. No, I think that traceability is a prerequisite for sustainability. So especially in some commodities, for example, in the shrimp value chain, it's not always very traceable. Companies will not always know where their shrimp is coming from. I just started a working group of aquaculture companies getting together to better measure and reduce their environmental footprint. And you can only measure if you know where your suppliers are coming from. So it's a group of companies that it's sort of a coalition of the willing. So they have good relationships, but I think for a lot of companies, how can they measure their Scope 3 emissions if they don't know it? So having better traceability systems is really needed in order to and it's normal. I think you also, as a retailer, you should understand where the stuff is coming from. That's due diligence. Yeah.
So knowing and transparency, that if you have the best intentions in the world, but you're driving without a windscreen, if your windscreen is completely you can't get to where you want to go. Sophie, I know GSI has had no obstacles at all. It's just been a piece of cake. Can you describe what made it a piece of cake?
I mean, as salmon, we're used to swimming upstream, right? So we can bounce over these obstacles as they come. I mean, I have to say the biggest obstacle I would agree with Bruce on is that it's knowing where to focus efforts. So often as the industry, they're facing challenges left, right, and center, and the challenges are always evolving. So one of the first things we did in GSI when we brought the companies together was really identify what were the most important areas to work on and where could we really drive impact through working together. And, we had a round table with all the companies and brought in various stakeholders as well. And there was different ideas coming all over the place. Should it be plastic? Should it be welfare, certification? Should it be consumer outreach? And there was a million ideas. But as we narrowed it down, it was quite clear there was really just 4 areas which needed kind of industry-wide focus on. And really by working together on those and setting ambitious but yet measurable goals, we could help the companies work towards them and actually show progress rather than just working on everything but not really having much impact at all. And to build on that, I think the second obstacle then is when the companies don't show progress. Not every year are things getting better and better, and not always the numbers looking great. And so the obstacle then is kind of maintaining that momentum and that motivation to keep on trying, to kind of be aware of, okay, something didn't work, but how do we now change that? And how do we, show improvement next year? So I think keeping everyone very focused on what they're working on and really driving towards showing improvement. But if they don't, that's okay. Let's keep on and find another way around it.
Great. And banks, are there obstacles to doing what you want when you have all the money?
I think I recognize, everything that has been said here, but I think still I will answer the question a little bit differently. I think for our perspective, the analytic part has been challenging. If you ask 2 credit analysts to look at the same company, they will come with pretty much the same conclusion. This is high risk or it's low risk. If you ask 2 sustainability analysts to look at the same company, they might give extremely different answers. And this is not just conceptual. If you look at credit rating scores from Standard & Poor's and Moody's, they have an extremely high level of correlation. If you look at the correlation between leading ESG rating agencies, it's a gunshot. It's all over the place. One company says it's good, the other one says it's bad. So I think it's a big job to find out what does it really mean to be sustainable. And then you get the second problem, which is how do you find the data to see how people actually perform within, such an analytic framework. And then the third becomes how to actually move, the clients and the portfolio.
So why don't we stay on the theme of data transparency, sunshine? How do we shine the light on what's really happening in an area in which our concept of what matters keeps changing? So Bruce, in your work, what role does data research and transparency play?
Thanks, Aaron. It's huge. And I think we have seen lack of access to data as a problem, not only, data perhaps not existing, but not existing in places that are easily to get to, or easy for people to get to the data, or in a format that is comparable. So you end up having people using, one of the challenges with, I think, ESG rating systems is you have different people with different data sets coming up with different conclusions. So they're not even agreeing on the fundamental data being used to make those decisions. We were finding that in Canada as well. We worked with the federal government to help create something called the Canadian Centre for Energy Information, recognizing that we didn't have consistent data across the country. So absolutely critical. And I think with we're not, I wasn't going to talk about it here so much, but we are actually doing a lot of work on sustainable finance in Canada. And I would say it's without exception that lack of access to data is being seen by the financial sector as one of the real challenges. And certainly even on taxonomy, we're seeing different taxonomies coming out from different countries using different measures, different value sets, different data. And it's going to take a while, I think, before that is really sorted out.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree with what you said, and that you really also need alignment around those key data points. And as IDH, we have different sector initiatives where we also try to first, agree on a methodology for example, measuring carbon footprint along the entire value chain. But it's then also important, I know that for example, if we were to develop something for tropical aquaculture, we need to really make sure that that also aligns with what Salman is doing, so that at retail level you can compare, right? And that goes across commodities. So I think it's very important that you align also with the things that are there. There is a greenhouse gas protocol. There is a PEFCR, so product environmental footprint category rules. But it's very complicated. So you need real experts that understand all the nitty gritty, and you don't want companies to spend a lot of time in that nitty gritty, but bring industries together. So that's what we're, for example, have done in the sustainability initiative on fruits and vegetables. They brought life cycle experts together. And then they put them together with about 40 fruit and vegetable companies, and they created a methodology that we now also adapt for other sectors. So and yeah, you need also expert help, but I think companies should really focus on starting to measure and start to reduce.
Thank you. Yeah, when I think we think about transparency and data, there's perhaps three kind of themes that come to mind. There's, benchmarking, knowing where we are, where we want to go. There's the accountability, so people can see what you're doing, and what you're doing is trustworthy and credible. And then there's the learning ability. And so within GSI, when we began, we got all the companies to start reporting against 14 key metrics, which are now on the website, and all the companies have to provide that data per company, per region each year. And at first, we did that because, the companies would come and say, people are using this outdated data against us, and these old numbers are floating around, and why are these numbers being used? And the answer was quite simply that the data they wanted that was now up to date wasn't actually anywhere out there. So people looking for data were just pulling up old data. So first of all, we had to put the real data out there so that we could start telling a story that was based on real data right now, and start that new benchmarking, and then show progress on that year on year. And in terms of accountability, not only built trust between the members and the companies, but other stakeholders, bringing them on that improvement journey with the companies to say, we might not be perfect right now, and this is where we are, but this is where we want to go, and this is how we're going to get there. And then you've got that very open dialogue of really what's happening and what you're going to do. But perhaps most importantly, and what Lisa just touched on, is it allows you to see where you can learn from each other. So, within GSI, we have companies who are all essentially doing the same thing, or the same thing very closely, but yet the numbers at the start were quite different. So immediately you get companies going, well, how are you achieving that? How are you doing that? Well, how are you doing it that way? And then all of a sudden you start to see some leveling out of the numbers, because once it's out there, you can have real conversations about how are you doing that and how do we improve it?
I think data is a big challenge, but it's getting better. I think, what Global Salmon Initiative has been doing is fantastic, both in making companies more open, and, as you say, making that information and data available in sort of an accessible way. It seems to me that there's also is a big improvement in data reported by companies in general. It used to be only the very big companies that would do this in the right way. Then there's been a lot of pressure from different NGOs and ESG analysts, etc. And I think more and more companies understand that they need to report in a constructive and good way and on the relative metrics, but there's still a lot that needs to be done.
So we're heading towards the last round, and what I'm hoping each of you could share is two things. They may come together, but one, of course, is from your experience, and you can summarize some of what we've already said, the critical elements of achieving change at speed and scale are. But I also want to know why you feel confident in the future. It's really easy when you look at the press and when you look at the failure to meet commitments and the general tendency towards doom and despair, to not be ready to go and do the necessary work. So I want to know what it is that you've experienced, what it is you've learned in your daily work that gives you the energy to believe that working hard and doing the right thing is worth it? Bruce, you can start. You want me to just wander around and talk for a while so you can think of your answer, or you already know? All right.
Yeah, thanks. At least, yeah, so on this second part, you know, when you worked on climate change for as long as I have, which is about 30 years, there certainly are times where you know, reports and reports and reports that come out year after year after year that say these are the things we need to do and they don't get done. You know, it can be a little depressing. I think what we're seeing now, though, finally, is this alignment that I started off describing, where the public, I think, really understands climate change is a problem. We're seeing the direct effects of climate change globally right now in serious ways, with fires and floods, et cetera. And governments, I think, are now finally making much more stringent efforts. I know in Canada, I think for the first time ever, really, we have a government that is very serious about tackling climate change, and we're seeing tremendous leadership in the private sector. So I just stay optimistic, feeling that we are now, hopefully, after 30 years, on the cusp of this big change moment. And I think the reality is, if you study change related to the environment, you realize, you know, relatively simple things like getting lead out of the environment, or dealing with cigarettes or mercury, things like that. It takes many decades before you can actually get everything aligned. So I mean, climate change, we're under a tight time constraint right now to make big change in a short period of time, but it feels like there is some willingness to do that. So in terms of, where I see, some of the, your first question around what really makes that change happen, I think there needs to be, for any kind of collaboration or any kind of effort, a very, very serious commitment to what that outcome is of the effort. I think too often people are getting together in rooms and then trying to figure out what to talk about when they get there. There has to be, like, everything fundamentally has to be not, whose share is of the challenge is it, but what are we doing within our own sector, within our own company, within our own country, to make the change, and we just need to get on with it.
Yeah, firstly, I think in order to get to real change, we really need to work together with the entire value chain. I mentioned that a lot before. And I think what makes me very happy and optimistic are people, of course. And I'm lucky within the aquaculture industry because it's really nice people quite often. I think people that work with fish might be special, but it's nice to work with very committed people. So that's good. But where I see a change is that there's really momentum on carbon. So companies approach us, say, we have set science-based targets. But we don't know how to get to scope 3. We really want to do so. We don't know how to. Can you help us? And we get more and more of those conversations every day, of also a lot of traders that want to distinguish themselves and really want to do the right thing. So I think that a lot of companies want to do it, but they don't know how to. And and that's the piece of the puzzle we need to crack. It's not we don't have conversations about why this matters anymore, which is a great point to get into real action.
Thank you. I think what keeps me thinking the world is going to be okay is that we can see that, as a human race, we are able to adapt and innovate and come up with new solutions. And so often the question, it is not a case of a lack of the willing, it's just a lack of having the knowledge to make the changes now. But through collaboration, and what we've seen in JSI is that it's possible to bring minds together, people together, and actually find new innovations and put those in place at speed and scale. So I'm hopeful that, over the next few years, we have the energy, the spirit, the creative minds to actually come up with solutions and put them out. And perhaps that, the historical perspective of competitiveness and companies being competitive, you mentioned earlier, Avram, perhaps that's changing a little. And perhaps now companies are seeing that actually having a purpose-driven vision and working with others is actually going to help them both economically in their reputation and on their sustainability. So perhaps they'll see the benefit of working collaboratively more and more.
My wife says that I will take any conversation and turn it on to fish, especially salmon. So I think that's what I'll do now also. I think one thing that makes me very optimistic is that if I think back only maybe say like 3-4 years, the salmon industry, at least in Norway, didn't understand the climate debate. They got confused when they met foreign investors who asked them about the climate when they discussed sustainability, because sustainability to them was the local environmental footprint, disease and parasites, etc. There's been a tremendous change. 3 years ago, we had done 0 green financing in the seafood sector in DNB. Now we've done $6 billion. We see that pretty much all the big salmon farmers on the exchange in Oslo have issued green bonds. Mowi, the world's largest producer, has 80% of their financing is now green or sustainability linked. We see that the smaller companies look to the bigger ones and get inspired by what they do. We see other segments of the value chain who have been kind of behind the curve, realizing that really big things are happening. They're also looking into this. And I think one thing which I think is very interesting also with green and sustainability linked financing is what the word you introduced, Bruce, human bandwidth. It increases the human bandwidth in the companies, and it moves a lot of it sort of from isolated marketing or sustainability departments to the chief financial officer, the chief executive officer, and the board of directors. And that's incredibly important in order to move change, at scale and speed.
All right, thank you. And I think I'm going to add my thing seems to keep going. I think I'm going to add my answer, which is I have hope because of the 4 of you. Over many, many years working in climate change, I've witnessed the debate being about who is bad, who is to blame, why it's not fair, why these polluters have to stop polluting. And it was like a morality play as opposed to a problem-solving exercise. And what I've heard from the 4 of you is an attitude is we got to get on and do something. It's not about blaming others. It's not about shaming others. It's about fixing. It's about doing the necessary work. So on behalf of everyone, not just me as the moderator, but on behalf of everyone in the global community, as well as everyone here in COP26, thank you not just for your participation in this panel, but thank you for being exemplars, for embodying the spirit necessary to deal with these things. All right, 5 minutes earlier in an hour, but it was enough.
Yeah.
Well, I think we did good, guys.
Felt like we did a good job.